All right, good afternoon, everyone. Let's get started. Welcome back to CCI Hironia's first Lunch and Learn webinar for 2026. We are starting a new year, and we have a great lineup of webinars to share with you. I'm Sonja Hodis, your moderator and a condo lawyer. And joining me today, we have a group of panelists who are going to be discussing their New Year's resolutions for condos and what they're suggesting that condos change in terms of their operations and in order to either lower costs or manage risks. So we're still at the beginning of the year, although we're into February, we still have lots of time to implement these suggestions. So whether you're a board member or a condominium manager, get your pens and papers ready, and you're going to want to take some notes during this webinar. But don't be afraid of if you miss something. We are recording this webinar as usual, and the recording will be posted on our website and on our YouTube channel in the next 7 to 10 days. Before we get started, though, I want to make sure that we take this opportunity to thank our sponsors for their support for our webinar series. And as you know, without the support of our sponsors, we are not able to provide these webinars to you free of charge. So thank you to our sponsors. I'm just going to put up the slide so that you can see who they are. Elia Associates, Condominium Lawyers, Common Ground Condo Law, and Blue Jay Irrigation. Thank you to our sponsors. If you want any information about our sponsors, all you need to do is go to our website, click on their logo, which you can find at the bottom of our landing page or on today's event, and that will take you directly to their website where you can get their contact information and more information about the services they provide. So thank you once again to all of our sponsors. If you are joining us live today or you're watching this recording on our YouTube channel, take a moment to either put in the chat box what you think condos should have as a New Year's resolution for 2026, or if you're on the YouTube channel, just stick it in the comments section what your thoughts are on what would be a good New Year's resolution for condos. We would love to see what you have to say. And while you're there, don't forget when you're on the YouTube channel to subscribe to our channel to show us how much you love these webinars. We would really love to see our subscription numbers double this year. Also, if during this webinar you have any questions, be sure to put them in the Q&A box. Our panel will try their best to get those questions answered during the webinar. And if you are a condominium manager and you are watching this webinar to get your CMRAO CPE credit, be sure to put your name, first and last name, as well as your company name in the chat box. Please do not put it in the Q&A box. In the chat box, that will confirm your attendance on this webinar. And then you just need to go to the CMRAO website to confirm your attendance and self-report it on their portal. So if this is your first time joining us and you don't know who CCI is the Canadian Condominium Institute. We are an independent nonprofit organization formed in 1982. We have chapters across the country from coast to coast, and in Ontario we have 8 chapters alone, and CCI Hironia is one of those chapters. Our main objective is education, but we also advocate for condos, and we represent all those involved from owners to directors to professionals, and we encourage all these stakeholders to work together. If you're not a member of CCI Hironia, you can join online on our website, ccihironia.com. If you are interested in joining another chapter, all you need to do is go to the national website, cci.ca, and you can find a chapter near you. While you're on the national website, you might want to check out the Resource Center, which can be accessed from the national website, or you can access it directly from the CCI Hironia website as well. The National Resource Center has numerous articles and resources available that have been prepared by chapters from coast to coast on a variety of condominium issues. Also, CCI Hironia, we are on Facebook and LinkedIn as well as Instagram, so be sure to check us out there and check out our newsletter on our website called Condo Buzz. We just released a new edition in the last couple weeks. And if you've missed any of our webinars, you can always find recordings of our webinars on our website, ccihironia.com, under the Resource Content tab, and you can also find them on our YouTube channel. So we've got a lot to talk about today, but just one final reminder before we get started with our panelists. If you are a condominium director and you are looking to avail yourself of the protection under Section 37 of the Condominium Act, just be advised that the information being provided today is general information and it's not information that is specific to your condominium or your specific situation. So if you want to avail yourself of the protection under Section 37, you do need to get an opinion from your own professional about your specific fact situation. Also, if you're watching this webinar at a later date, just know that the information in this webinar is current as of February 20th, 2026. Things may change if you're watching this at a later date, so again, be sure to check with your professionals to make sure that the information is still applicable to your situation. And any references to legislation or the Condominium Act are references to Ontario legislation. All right, so let's get started because we've got a lot to talk about. There's some great resolutions that are being proposed. And we are going to start off with our first speaker, Jennifer Beaver, who's a condominium manager. And if you want any information about any of our speakers, we have our chat master with us, Debbie Dale. Thank you, Debbie, for joining us. She's going to be putting all their information in the chat box, so you can always contact them at a later date if you want some more information about what they're talking about. So Jennifer, start us off. You're going to talk about a resolution involving incident reporting.
Yes, thank you so much, Sonja. It's always a pleasure to be here, and good afternoon, everyone. In condo world, we're always dealing with rising costs, insurance premiums, aging buildings, higher repair costs than what we would have expected, and a growing list of legal responsibilities. With all that pressure, you'd think that we'd be a little bit more robust in our incident reporting. But what I find is that we're missing the quick wins on incident reporting. So today I wanted to talk to you about one change I wish every condominium corporation would make in 2026 to improve operations and hopefully save the condo money. What I see in many condominium communities is that incident reporting tends to be delayed or incomplete or verbal or never really formally documented. And I'm not talking about major events. I think major events we generally understand that needs a solid and robust incident report. I'm kind of talking about the little things, the near misses, the small leaks, a slippery floor, a hallway scuff, a conflict between residents, one that might have resolved really quickly, an unauthorized contractor, or damage that appears anywhere within the common element. These smaller events often go unreported because people think it's not important or someone else will see it, or I don't want to make a fuss, or I don't want to cause more work for the manager. And sometimes it's I don't want to fill out the form. But in condo environments, these things are exactly where reporting would actually help save you money and potentially even get proactive. If I could ask for one change in Ontario condos, it would be use your phone. Everybody has one now. Take a quick picture. Don't worry about making it a super complicated form. Take the picture, make notes, and submit it however you would naturally submit something. So if you're kind of on an email base, you would use your email. If you have a portal system, you would submit it to your portal. If you guys are on the Microsoft To-Dos, throw it in Microsoft To-Do. Whatever it is that you guys use as the property manager or as board members, or even residents who might discover something, whatever the typical process is for your condominium, submit those quick photos and details that you may see. This way you're avoiding things like the long form. You know, everybody has the big form and you have to fill it out. And it's so important that that eventually gets done. But in that moment, if you were to capture something, whether you're a board member or an owner or a contractor, even you can create a way in which everybody can share. It can actually be timely and help prevent something bigger happening from later. So the key isn't about perfection, it's about timeliness. And when we report incidents right away, even the small ones, we capture the truth while it's still fresh. We prevent repeat damage or even an incident from actually occurring. So if you think about the wet pool of water on the floor, take a quick picture, submit it as an incident. Make sure you identify that to your superintendent, maybe throw up the wet floor sign, but either way, you're mitigating a potential slip and fall. And that also helps us create an accurate documentation of what actually happened. So why this matters so much in the condo world is condos timely reporting has huge benefits. First of all, it helps avoid, or hopefully it helps to avoid insurance claims. Many water loss and slip and falls could have been prevented if someone had to report the early warning signs. When things are documented quickly, you can respond quickly. And that often means solving the issue without a claim, which prevents your premiums from increasing. Secondly, and it also, let's keep it real, it also prevents somebody from having an injury or major damage to the corporation. It also prevents corporations or protects the corporation legally. I am not a lawyer, and there's other lawyers here, but what I will say is if you do take reasonable steps to remedy an unsafe situation, you are acting in the best interest of the corporation. So timely reports will show that you were aware, you took action, and you documented everything. Thirdly, it supports enforcement under the Condo Act. Let's say somebody did something and it created a chargeback scenario. Now you have a picture and a brief description of what it was, and you can include that with your chargeback. And that helps the owner understand the whole process and experience. Also, it saves time for staff and management. A clear and immediate report is far easier to deal with than a complicated investigation 3 days later. And finally, it stops reoccurring issues, the little things that drain the condo budget quietly and over time. The financial reality in Ontario condos. So anyone serving on a board, and I happen to serve on a condominium board as well, knows that the cost of things just keep going up. So if you get the little issues in front of your manager, your board, earlier, you can actually save money in that area. Examples would be a small leak in the mechanical room. Sometimes that, unnoticed, can take a huge drain and literally on on the corporation's budget. A reoccurring garage leak that never gets caught because nobody reports it because it's tucked in behind someone, and when you're doing your general walk, you just don't see it. Or a slip and fall hazard that isn't documented that is now turned into a legal claim. Condos can make this change super easily. Provide a reporting method that takes under 60 seconds. If people need a laptop or a long form or a detailed statement, it just won't happen as quickly as we might need it to. You don't need every detail in that moment. You just need to capture the event and then fill in the details later. And encourage reporting from everyone, staff, security, cleaners, contractors, and residents. Everyone has a different view on your community, so using this quick win method can really be beneficial to the community, especially for those that don't have full-time managers on your property. There's so many smaller condominium corporations, townhomes, and buildings alike that don't have full-time managers. So anytime there's somebody on the site that can report in, that would be a really helpful thing. Reporting is not about blame. The biggest barrier isn't always technology, it's psychological. We worry about causing trouble or getting someone in trouble or making a too big of a deal out of something that's small. But the message in 2016 is reporting isn't about blame, it's about prevention. It's about protecting the building, the board, and the owners collectively. Every report, even the tiny ones, is an act of responsibility that saves the money, the corporation money, and reduces risk. So in closing, when people capture things as they see them, not hours later or days later, you reduce risk, protect your budget, strengthen your legal position, and create a safer, more accountable environment for everyone. Small reports prevent big problems. And that's all I have for today. Thank you, Sonja.
Thank you, Jennifer. And I love that resolution because I always say on my tombstone, it's going to say document, document, document. So that totally fits in with that. And I am sure Patricia and Ashley will agree with me on that. So thank you. There is a question in the Q&A for you, Jennifer, about one of the programs that you mentioned. So I'm just going to direct you to there. And
Thank you.
Leslie, Jennifer will try and answer that in the Q&A box. We're going to move on because we have a lot of people that we got to get through. So our next speaker is Jon Juffs. And Jon is going to be talking about reserve fund studies, but also the reality check that we should be making. So, Jon, take it away.
Thank you very much, Sonia, and thank you very much to CCI Hironia and Sonia and Debbie in particular for organizing these webinars. They make it look so effortless, but we know it isn't. And of course, thank you to everyone who's attending today. I'm known as the Reserve Fund Whisperer, and really think that in 2026, condos will be, uh, you know, particularly blessed if they followed this resolution. And this is a three-part resolution for your reserve fund study. And it's a reality check on your reserve fund plans. And we need to not just have a plan, but have a plan that reflects how the building is actually aging and how construction costs are really changing and how the funding decisions that the board is making affect the owners. And this can sometimes be competing interests, but we need to make sure that we're looking at all of those things because it's so often the case that reserve fund plans, are generic and they have generic escalation assumptions, very isolated component scheduling, the book values, roof's going to last 20 years, therefore every 20 years you have it happening, and yet you seem to be doing it every 17 years. And the funding, well, the funding, we promised everybody there'd be no increase, so everything has to be a zero increase, so we're going to fall behind every year. Well, these aren't good plans, and they're not things that corporations should resolve to do. So I'm asking all condominium corporations in 2026 to resolve to do it differently. And the difference is in three parts. So if you need your pen, I'll wait. First, make sure you apply industry appropriate cost escalation rates on three things: the contributions, the spending from reserve, and the interest earnings in reserve. Those are not all the same. In fact, we know from a great deal of research done over the years in studying building permit values that the cost of construction is going up at greater than the consumer price index, except for some very isolated economic events, that usually affect the world. And so those things act every once in a while to have a drop, but typically they're going up, and they're going up at greater than CPI. No surprise there, because labor, material, and equipment that go into the major repair and replacement work in condos is going up faster than the rate of consumer price index. Secondly, make sure that you phase and coordinate projects in the plan so that you can afford to do it when it makes sense. And this is where the art and science of building science, fit together. And there's some logistical things. I followed another planner one time, asked to review the plan in the hopes of reducing fees, only to discover that their plan was incorrectly based on replacing the water main 3 years after having done $1 million worth of asphalt paving. And I said, does it really make sense to spend $1 million to then go and try and spend $4 million and ruin your $1 million worth of effort? Wouldn't it be better to put that all together? And the answer was yes, of course, it makes more sense. The trouble is now that $1 million spending became $5 million in spending. And of course, their desire to have lower fees didn't work out. And so assessments and loans were being evaluated. So second, aspect to this resolution is phase and coordinate projects based on logic and bundling that makes sense. If you are doing eaves troughs, it might make sense to do asphalt shingles and extend that ice and water shield further up because of the experiences you had in the winter with ice damming. Who knows? But there's sometimes, aspects to the job that can be combined together that just make sense to reduce things like mobilization charges and make access logistics make more sense. And in that, by doing that, you can have real values brought to each project instead of being one-offs here and there. So just to recap, first, apply the three rates of change. Second, use logic and building science principles. And then third, I want you to treat funding as a toolkit, not just a single dial, not a set it and forget it. Responsible plans make good use of three ways of getting money. And it really is the only three ways that condominium corporations can get money: through their regular common expense contributions, through occasional special assessments. Don't plan on having special assessments every year, and when appropriate, borrowing. And these three ways of getting money into reserve are the backbone of good plans. Some people might say, oh, well, we're involved in a lawsuit, we're guaranteed to win, and we're going to get $1 million. We're going to put all that into reserve. And that was a real situation a couple decades ago now. And they did win their lawsuit, but they did not win as much as they thought. They weren't able to put in as much as they thought. So this is wishful thinking. That's not really part of your toolkit. It would be icing on the cake if it happened, but don't make it part of the plan. And so if you treat it like a way to develop what you want, or getting back to the asphalt and water main coordination project, it made sense in that case to borrow the money. They're long-term assets that people are willing to lend against. The corporation was able to get a very competitive rate, and they were able to do the job because it made sense to do it at the same time, and it was paid off in a relatively short order. And thankfully, some of the other projected expenses did not occur, so they were able to pay down the loan even faster than expected. And so that worked out for everyone's benefit. So by using this three-point resolution, boards and managers can move from just simply having a checkbox somewhere that says, yes, I have a reserve fund study, to having a tool that they can use every meeting that can help lower the total life cycle cost of the condominium corporation, reduces the likelihood of financial shocks because you can, literally plan for them. And then when somebody challenges you, as they inevitably do, you can say, listen, we did our due diligence. We did our best to Section 37 reliance on expert knowledge for our fact-specific situation. And that is all supportable and defensible. And so just to recap, three-part resolution for 2026, 3 rates of change, coordinate projects, and treat funding as a toolkit. And that's all I have on that, Sonja.
All right, thanks, Jon. And to get another perspective on reserve fund studies and another resolution, we're going to now switch over to Blair Spinney, and he's going to give us a perspective from an auditor. Blair?
Well, I don't know how much this is from an auditor's perspective, but it actually ties in very much to what Jon has said. In fact, I think my resolution might be able to be done sort of simultaneously with Jon's. First of all, Happy Lunar New Year to everyone. And I guess we're trying to look at it from a risk assessment approach to maybe some of the same ideas. So what are the financial risks? What happens when you run out of money? Generally, boards want to avoid special assessments, loans. They're undesirable, but what are really the repercussions of special assessment or having to get a loan? And here's where I think it's a good idea to look at the owner demographics. So I think there's a continuum or a spectrum of what owners' financial capabilities are. We have from the low or fixed income side of things up to the more affluent owner demographics, where say maybe it's a vacation resort type property. So just for argument's sake, we'll just say we're at the lower end of the spectrum. And when we're looking at where you're going to run out of money, where are the risk areas? So there's the operating side. There's potentials for utility rate increases, lawsuits, whole gamut of ideas or problems that can come up in the operating side. And these are generally covered in a lot of more of the budgeting type courses. But I think the reserve side is where it really hits the headlines, right? You see $70,000 per unit assessed in Toronto. I think that was a recent one. So what do we do with the reserve? When we're doing our budget annually, do we just plunk in the amount off the notice to the owners and we're done? But what I suggest is that there should be a look at the detailed study on an annual basis. And that's something that can be part of your annual plan, possibly prior to getting your budget done. And I think it would start with using the actual detailed study as a tool, and looking at what are any of the high risk components. And these are things that just can't be put off. We're talking about, replacing carpet or refurbishing the interiors versus, structural issues. So also there is a production or publication from the Professional Engineers of Ontario, a guideline, and they identify components with higher financial and safety risk factors. One is having 4 or more stories in height in your building. The second is suspended structural slabs that support parking, driveways, or landscaping. Third is post-tension structures, and I didn't know what that meant, so I had to Google it. So this is concrete buildings and slabs reinforced with high-strength steel tendons tensioned after the concrete cures. So that's something, if you're not sure about, I definitely talk to the engineer about that. And the fourth one's pretty obvious: balconies or buildings with balconies that are fully exposed. I see that a lot, and it's comes in sooner and more expensive than one would think. So those are the specifically areas that are identified, but there's also the category of other. So I think that's part of the dialogue you need to have with the engineer, especially anytime you're having a class 1 or class 2 study being done. And so this is what you're going to look at on an annual basis. What's the timing of these things, the cost, and maybe having a separate evaluation if there's any doubts as to whether these are items that you're going to look at sooner or later, have to have them addressed. Those are the items you really want to keep on top of. And if you have a separate evaluation done on these items, you might discover that these things are going to have to be done sooner rather than later. And you may even have to issue a new notice of future funding, even before your 3-year timeline has come up. So I think this will help you. Hopefully, this type of analysis should provide some sort of forewarning of any potential issues that might come up. And be sure to document the process. I think documentation is key here. I think Jennifer talked about documentation. I think all these things are important to document, because it'll help you in future years, so you can just sort of go through, what did we look at? What did we identify last year? What's changed? So you can update that in coming years a lot more easily. And also, I think that will reflect the due diligence performed by you as a director. So that will help with any sort of indemnification issues you may have. So that's it for me. And I came in just under 7 minutes.
Thanks, Blair. So thanks to Jon and Blair for dealing with reserve funds. It definitely seems like sort of an underlying theme there is don't just get the reserve fund and shelve it for 3 years and then look at it at that 3-year time period. There's a lot of things that we should be doing proactively in between. And both you and Jon have had some great suggestions. All right, so we're still talking about projects and large money projects, and we've got Ryan Griffiths with us, who is our president for CCI Huronia, but he's going to talk to you about his wish for 2026 in terms of planning for large money projects. Ryan?
Thanks, Sonja. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. I'm seeing a real theme brewing here. A lot of what I'm going to talk about sort of expands on and has the same sentiment that Jon and Blair have. So I'm going to talk about planning for major projects, and the resolution is to start planning sooner rather than later. I'm going to try to give you some advice on how to do that. So, I mean, our business at CLG helps condominium corporations navigate funding challenges, and we see corporations at different stages of that planning process. And I can tell you that earlier planning is always better than later planning. So, we're involved in situations that could have been improved if the problem was identified earlier, and the corporation had really more time and more options. So proactive planning is always better than reactive planning. And in my mind, there are three elements to the planning process. So it's project planning the project itself and the scope of work and timing. There's financial planning and how that funding is going to be obtained. And then there's owner engagement and communication that can't be overlooked in that planning process. So the execution of all three of those elements can really be improved if the board has more time. So time can be your enemy or it can be your friend, depending on where you are. There are a few processes that I would suggest you implement that can help. So the first is actually the same as Blair recommended. On an annual basis, take a look at your reserve fund study. Take a look at the next 5 years. Look for the largest projects, maybe the top 5 or 6, depending on the cost. It's going to be these big projects that can create a funding issue. So this is items like the envelope of the building, a parking garage, windows and doors, roofs, balconies, roadways, repiping projects. It's the big stuff that can throw you off. And in that process, the board should really question whether the cost estimates and the timing are both reasonable, they're realistic. So really dig into those, and sometimes you may need to take a deeper dive. And I suggest going through this same process. So this is sort of number 2, every time you update your reserve fund study every 3 years. That gives you the opportunity to question the plan, talk about it with your planner, review different alternatives, and get their opinions and advice. So look at those biggest projects, where they're planned and how they're planned. Does the cost, the timing, and the approach make sense? So sometimes we see these big projects planned on a phased basis, but they don't really make sense to do them on a phased basis. And unless you address that up front, you may find yourself in a difficult position for funding when you go to navigate the project. Look for work that's missing. Underground utilities like water mains are often missed or assumed to have an unlimited lifespan, which aren't realistic. So if something's on the horizon and the cost or timing is questionable, consider going an extra step and doing a condition assessment. So a condition assessment is a detailed evaluation of that specific component. And it will give you a better understanding potentially of the remaining useful life, of the anticipated cost of the repair. It could be that it'll last longer than you expected, or it won't last as long. It could be that the scope needs to be different than what was in the study, and the cost is going to be more. But it can really help you get out in front of a project and identify if there's going to be a funding issue sooner rather than later. So more time equals more options, right? The more time you have gives you maybe the option to raise fees and save rather than do a loan or an assessment. It may give you the option to do interim repairs to extend the life of an asset. It may give you time to review different funding options and implement the plan years before the funding is actually needed. And it gives you the opportunity maybe to engage the owners earlier in the planning process when you have more options. So, one example I see a lot lately are window replacement projects. And boards are struggling because the cost has increased so much. And the cost of that window project is so big relative to the other projects. So whatever strategy you choose, it's really going to impact the plan significantly. So if a board's planning early, they can look at whether it makes sense to save more money and how much they need to save to do it later. They can look at whether they can do some interim repairs in order to implement that plan. Sometimes the corporation is comparing that and the idea of deferring it and saving for it versus doing it sooner and using a loan to finance that project. At times, they're finding that the cost may be very similar, and they can bring those options to the owners earlier. Some are deciding to do a special assessment to do the work and keep their fees lower. So, but no matter what route the corporation goes, if they start planning earlier and they keep the owners informed, they can get their feedback. And the goal here is adequate planning, but it's also to minimize the shock and the urgency around being reactive because you've been proactive. So really, I think the takeaway there is look at the biggest projects on an annual basis. Look at them with your reserve fund planner when you're doing your reserve fund study update. Consider doing a deeper dive in a condition assessment report. Get out as far ahead of these things as you can, and you'll be better off from a planning perspective and from a community perspective.
Thanks, Ryan. And I love that. More time, more options. What a great way to start looking at how we're dealing with those big money projects. All right, so moving on from sort of the money aspect of things, we're going to turn over to Ashley Winberg, and she's going to talk about repair and maintenance obligations and insurable losses. And Ashley, what is your resolution for the condominium community in respect to those items?
My resolution is to encourage boards, managers, and owners to reacquaint themselves with their fundamental legal obligations with respect to maintenance, repair after damage, and insurable loss by reviewing your condo docs. Why? Because I would say that our team at Common Ground, about 30% of the calls and emails that we get on a consistent basis from managers and board members are just simply asking us for advice related to these concepts. And this is because these concepts are often misunderstood from the onset, from the very beginning. And they can often be misinterpreted and misapplied by corporations for years, often without any legal intervention, until an owner's lawyer or insurance adjuster advises the corporation that their understanding or application is incorrect. And that can then create a larger issue. So I recommend that the theme is proactive. So I recommend that proactive action be taken by all boards to review their declaration, as well as the related sections of the Act that pertain to these concepts, and that they understand, how these concepts are defined in these documents, when they are to be applied, and how they coincide with one another. So this will allow your corporation to then identify any ambiguities or potential misinterpretations that may have occurred in the past. And by identifying these at the onset, it will allow you to work with your corporation's solicitor in terms of creating a strategy for how to address these going forward. Addressing this in a proactive manner is much more cost effective, and it will also allow your board to create this strategy and work with your corporation's lawyer in a timeline determined by your board, instead of a timeline determined by the owner's adjuster or the owner's lawyer, because there'll be much more heat on your corporation at that time to get this done and communicated. So how to do this? I usually recommend that this be done in 2 steps. So the first, by the board reviewing the documents on their own, and then seeking clarification from legal counsel if there's any ambiguities. So if ambiguities or misinterpretations are identified, your board, as I mentioned, will then have time to work with your lawyer to ensure that a strategy is created and a plan is created to ensure that these concepts will be and can be correctly applied going forward, and in a manner that aligns with your any past practices that sometimes may not have been 100% in compliance with the Act or the Declaration, but perhaps can be brought into compliance and should be brought into compliance because it would be in your corporation's best interest to continue that practice. So once that's done, the second step is to then communicate these concepts and how they interact, as well as the respective obligations of owners in the corporation, to your owners in a clear, comprehensive document. I often refer to this document as a repair and maintenance chart. It generally, when I prepare it, consists of a first page that defines the terms maintenance, repair, repair after damage, repair in the event of an insurable loss. And then for each of those terms, provides practical examples of how they would actually apply in practice. Then the second part of that document is usually the chart itself, which when I prepare it, it lists various components. So it could be east trough, window trim, front door, every little thing, like the exterior door handle, the garage door, all the various components that might be referred to or addressed specifically in your corporation documents, or are often raised by the board or owners in terms of, hey, are we supposed to repair this, or is the corporation? Have all of those listed. And then for each component, the chart would then first identify whether they form part of the unit, exclusive use common elements, or general common elements. And then there would be subsequent columns that would identify the party responsible for maintaining it, cleaning it, repairing it after damage, insuring it, and repairing it in the event of an insurable loss. And that chart in that comprehensive document can be as specific or as general as your corporation would like, but generally more information is better. That way it will save your corporation time and money when owners have questions, or if the corporation does something that's not in compliance with your documents. So that's my recommendation, and I hope your corporations look into doing that this year.
Thanks, Ashley. And speaking of, our governing documents and creating this nice chart that Ashley's proposing, we're now going to switch over to Patricia Elia, who is a condominium lawyer, also a great sponsor of our webinars, along with Ashley's firm, Common Ground Condo Law. And Patricia's going to talk about her resolution in terms of better corporate governance. Patricia?
Thanks very much, Sonja. My resolution for 2026 is to encourage boards to have better corporate governance to minimize or eliminate corporate risk and manage costs effectively. So governance is important because its importance in the administration of any corporation. You have to have records because a corporation is an entity. In condominium corporations, implementation of statutory governance expectations is critical. You don't really have a choice. You really have to adhere to the act. But it's also effective in managing operational and strategic risk. So when I speak of governance, I'm talking about the implementation of the act, the declaration, bylaws, and rules together with policies and protocols. This means connecting the dots on what you read and what you actually do. Under Section 37, you have a duty to act prudently, but what are you actually doing? You're a financial steward. We've talked about money. We're actually also managing assets, and Ashley's talked about maintenance and repair obligations. And one of the other things we need to think about now these days in asset management is that we're actually investing. We're not just maintaining assets, we're actually trying to build our equity. We also have to ensure compliance, that the fourth level of government is operating properly. We must disclose our conflicts if we are interested in any of these contracts. But the goal is to affect real good, efficient operational function and long-term planning, not micromanaging, but connecting the dots so that risk is managed at a higher level. The courts have really endorsed this obligation and focus. In MTCC 985 and Van Duzer, the court said the board of directors shall manage the affairs of the corporation. Part of a board's obligation is to oversee and manage the common elements of a condo. The corporation is deemed to be the occupier of the common elements and may be liable as such. There is a risk, right? Section 26. Therefore, the corporation, and by extension, the board, has a legal obligation to manage the common elements. Under Section 55, in McKay and Waterloo North, the judge said the act obliges the condominium corporation to keep adequate records. One is impelled to ask, adequate for what? An examination of the act provides some answers. The objects of the corporation are clear: to manage the property. It has a duty to control, administer the common elements and the assets of the corporation. It has a duty to effect compliance. each owner enjoys the correlative right to performance of any duty of the corporation, specified by the Act, declaration, bylaws, and rules. As well, in 371-672 for Canada Inc. and CCC 375, what was really reiterated there was the power of the board to make business decisions. And I really strongly recommend you read that case on how to do your minutes. This board was actually really proactive in really addressing the overall risks that are to be considered. And here, the unit owner had wanted to convert commercially using parking spaces to hourly rates. And the board was saying, yeah, you can do it, but you have to implement these other things. And the court said, in this case, the board's decision had the effect of rendering the respondent's proposal less profitable. But that doesn't mean that the board unfairly disregarded the interest of the respondent. The board was entitled, indeed required, to consider the impact of changes on the interest of other unit owners. And that highlights a really important thing when you as a board are looking at the big picture. And as a deemed occupier of the common elements of the condominium, it was also entitled to consider the security implications for users of the common elements. It did not ignore or treat the interests of the respondents of being of no importance, that is the unit owner. It's simply in good faith and after a fair process, which should be documented in your minutes, determined that legitimate and reasonable competing interests were more important. Its decision not to approve the requested changes to the common elements, unless the respondent hired a security guard, was within the range of reasonable choices. And that's what you want to have backing you up. So I have a quick question for you. When you are new to a board, how do you prove that the rules you are enforcing on the owners have actually been passed in accordance with Section 58? This was an issue in La Fortune and CCC 37, where the tribunal found that the corporation hadn't been keeping up its records. So how do we move forward with some of these lessons? Because that's what the case law is. Good lessons on what to avoid and how to structure better. Hold regular board meetings, make decisions, don't defer decisions. Keep your operations going. Adhere to the scheduled governance structure for AGMs, but also consider this. Change your declarations, bylaws, rules, and ensure you have policies and procedures that are robust to give you as a corporation more empowerment. So amending the declaration means including broader, comprehensive indemnities. Robust bylaws today include parameters around single-family dwelling, maintenance and repair obligations, provisions on pets, provisions on service animals, a code of conduct for directors. And having meaningful policies today means having a human rights accommodation policy, information management policy, anti-workplace violence and harassment policy. And it's not enough just to have the policy. You actually have to review it, update it periodically, and you have to implement it right to a T, because parties like the Ministry of Labor will definitely come in and talk about whether you've adhered to the policy. So remember, in your management of governance, you're not just managing under the Act, you're also managing under all the legislation that applies. So ensure that each of the layers are consistent between the Act, the DEC, the bylaws, the rules, policies, and procedures. Follow them and create a set of records that show you actually have done it, so that the next directors will know that the rules that they're enforcing actually were brought into place in accordance with Section 58. So that means really good minutes. So I think better corporate governance can eliminate or minimize your corporate risk because you will have a good set of foundational decision making, supports what the board's authority is, and the records. And, as Sonja says, document, document, document. Thanks, Sonja.
Thanks, Patricia. We're going to have to get like a bulk order on these tombstones. Patricia, somebody was asking in the Q&A if you could put the cases you were referencing. Sure. So if you have a chance, maybe just shoot them into the chat box and then everyone can see those. All right. We're running out of time very quickly. So I'm just going to move on to our next speaker, who's Natalia Polis. And she's going to talk about streamlining the election process. Natalia?
Great. Thanks, Sonja. So for those of you in attendance that do subscribe,
accessibility shortcuts.
We lost you. We lost your voice there, Natalia.
Right, can you,
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay. My computer's not working, but that's okay. So for those of you who do subscribe to Lash Condo Law's blog, you may know that Lash Condo Law is not the biggest fan of proxies. AGMs are already stressful for managers as well as boards. You have a significant amount of work to do before your AGM even starts. You have to compile your notices, you have to organize scheduling with the various stakeholders involved in your AGM, and ultimately you have to send your notices on time. Now, the kicker. You have your one problematic owner that comes into the AGM at 6:58 p.m., just 2 minutes before the start of your AGM, and they submit over 100 proxies to register. This can certainly derail your AGM. As the manager, or if you have your legal counsel in attendance, you are now required to review all of these proxies to see whether or not they are valid, they are properly filled out, the signatures are in the proper locations, and ultimately they're not fraudulent. So this takes a significant of time out of your AGM and oftentimes delays it, or in some situations, completely gets your AGM canceled. I've had this situation last year where the majority of the proxies were fraudulent proxies. So now, how can we resolve this in 2026? Ultimately, the goal is to abolish proxies altogether, eliminate their use. However, right now we're still in the time where corporations do use proxies. So instead of completely eliminating them or completely restricting them, condo corporations should consider either implementing bylaws or perhaps, though less enforceable, a policy as to how to submit proxies in advance of the meeting. So rather than having that one owner submit 100 proxies just moments before the meeting, you actually have specific timeframes where proxies need to be submitted to the corporation in advance of the meeting itself. That provides an opportunity for your manager, your board, whoever it may be, your lawyer, to review the proxies for their validity rather than spending the time to review all the proxies at the meeting and waste all the owner's time in doing so. So that's one resolution that I would like to see implemented in 2026 is bylaws or policies that do direct how proxies are submitted and how voting is done at annual general meetings or any owners meetings really where proxies are required or are submitted. The other resolution I would like to also see is another type of bylaw, which is a nominations bylaw. So the Condominium Act doesn't actually contemplate nominations from the floor. The only real requirements is that a corporation provide owners with a preliminary notice. In that notice, there's a date specified for candidates to submit their intention to run for the board. And then in the notice package, those candidates need to be included along with their disclosure statements. However, it's been common practice for years and years to have nominations from the floor. So you have an owner or a resident step forward and nominate themselves. Oftentimes they should do their disclosure statements orally at the meeting or alternatively in writing. The problem here, and I've seen this a few times in 2025, is sometimes these candidates are not qualified to run for the board. So they do not meet the qualifications set out in your bylaws. And what the problem could be is that these persons get elected onto the board and only subsequent their election, you find out they're not qualified, and then you're in a conundrum as to what do we do about disqualifying them? Do we acclaim someone? Do we appoint someone onto the board? Do we hold a new election? How do we notify the owners of this discrepancy? So another thing to consider in 2026 is implementing a nominations bylaw, where you could actually restrict, unless otherwise necessary, nominations from the floor. So those are my two resolutions that I would like to see implemented in 2026.
Thanks, Natalia. And just before we wrap up today's webinar, I'm going to get my resolution in. But before I do that, I want to invite everyone to participate in the chat and tell me which of these resolutions that you've heard so far you're going to try and implement for your condo. And while you're doing that, I'm going to talk about what my resolution for 2026 is. And because I'm really short on time now, I'm going to refer all of you to a recent article that I wrote for Condo Business in the winter of 2025 about taking harassment seriously. And my resolution for 2026 that I'm hoping everyone in this industry is going to adopt is that we treat harassment as a serious concern, as a safety issue, and not as a nuisance. And I talk about in that article, and we've seen a couple cases coming from the courts dealing with harassment, some cases coming from CAT dealing with harassment, and we can see a very different line of approach in terms of the court dealing with the harassment issue as a safety issue under Section 117.1, and CAT trying to squeeze harassment issues into their jurisdiction under the nuisance provisions under Section 117.2, which is what their jurisdiction is limited to. And I refer in my article to two cases, one being a court case and one being a CAT case. And, you know, one of the very big differences between those two cases is the cost consequences that are being imposed on individuals who are engaging in harassing behavior. And we all know that one of the best ways to change behavior is to make people pay and affect their pocketbook. And so just as a comparison, in the court case, the offending individual was ordered to pay $26,000 in costs to the corporation to deal with the bad behavior and for the corporation to obtain compliance. On the other hand, in the CAT case, the offending owner, who was just equally as offending as the owner in the court case, and in the CAT case, the offending owner actually had two condominium managers resign from their position because of his actions, was only required to pay $200, which is the filing fee the condo corporation paid to the CAT. Very big discrepancy in terms of the penalties that are kind of being imposed by way of costs. Definitely, I think there's a strong message when you're going to pay $26,000 in costs versus paying $200 in costs. And then another, good reason why we need to start treating these matters, harassment, as a safety issue is in relation to the types of orders that the court is prepared to make versus what the CAT is prepared to make. And basically, in a very short time that I have, the court was prepared to make some very specific orders about things that the owner was not allowed to do. So, for example, refrain from communicating in person with any owner, tenant, guest, or customer of the board member that he was harassing, or to come within 10 feet of any board member while on the common elements. And in contrast, the CAT wasn't prepared to make those types of orders, and basically was only prepared to make an order that basically said you must comply with your governing documents, which doesn't have a lot of weight behind it. So we can see from the case law that we've had to date that, when you treat harassment as a nuisance, the consequences that are being imposed are very minor and don't send the right message in terms of correcting people's behavior. So my wish for 2026 is let's treat harassment of board members, of condominium managers, of professionals who work with condominiums. Seriously, let's treat it like a safety issue under Section 117.1 and stop trying to treat it like a nuisance just so that we can deal with it at the CAT instead of at the courts. So that's my resolution for 2026. Thank you to all of my panel for sharing their resolutions for 2026. I hope all of you have been able to walk away with at least one or two ideas of things that you could implement in the upcoming year in your condominium communities. And if you want to still put your suggestions for your resolutions for 2026 in the chat box, we still have a bit of time, but I'm going to wrap up this webinar because we're now at 1 o'clock. I want to take this opportunity to once again thank our sponsors for supporting us with our webinars, and specifically this webinar. And thank you to Elia Associates Condominium Lawyers, Common Ground, Common Law, and Blue Jay Irrigation for your support in today's webinar. Again, if you want any information about our sponsors, be sure to just go to our website, click on their logos on our landing page or on today's event page, and that will take you directly to their websites so that you can contact them and get more information about their services. And don't forget to check out our website for upcoming webinars. We have our webinars set for March, April, and May this year. March 20th, legislative developments is the topic. April 24th, we're going to be talking all about insurance. And May 22nd, we are going to be talking about Stranger Things, managing the unseen and uncertain. All of our webinars go from 12 to 1. We will be seeking approval from the CMRAO for all of our upcoming webinars. And also don't forget, if you want to participate in our director certificate courses, we are holding the 101 course, Governance Fundamentals, on March 11th, starting at 6:30 p.m. on Zoom. And April 22nd, we are dealing with the 105 course, Reserve Fund Fundamentals, starting at 6:30 p.m. on Zoom. You can register for all of the webinars and the director's course directly on our website, ccihuronia.com. If you have any ideas for upcoming webinars, please send us an email to admin@ccihuronia.com with your ideas for topics or speakers, and we'll see if we can incorporate those ideas into our fall lineup. And again, don't forget, if you've missed any of our webinars, check us out on YouTube or find the recordings on our website. And just before we leave, if you are a condominium manager and you haven't put your name in the chat to confirm your attendance today, please do so before we wrap up this webinar. And be sure to check out what some of our other CCI chapters are presenting over the next month. So here's just a quick rundown. CCI Toronto is on March 24th, presenting NORC, Aging in Place. CCI Golden Horseshoe on February 24th is presenting Order in the Meeting, the CAT's new role in condo disputes. On February 24th, CCI London is also presenting their Condo Director Course 104, Enforcement Fundamentals. And on March 3rd, they are having their There Are No Stupid Questions event. CCI Eastern Ontario on February 26th is doing the Advanced Director's Course Litigation. That's a new course that's come out, so that's a great one to check out. And CCI Grand River on February 25th is doing the 108 Condo Director Course Repair, Maintenance, and Change Fundamentals. If you want to know what events are happening at our chapters across the country, you can just go to the cci.ca national website and you'll see all the events for chapters from coast to coast. So that's a wrap for us today. Thank you for joining us. I am hoping that people have put some of their resolution ideas into the chat box so we can share that. And until next time, which will be March 20th when we talk about legislative developments, I wish you all a great rest of your Friday and a great weekend, and we'll see you on March 20th. Thank you, everyone.